Roland Paris, to you first. What's instructive about what happened 30 years ago in terms of our understanding how things are going today?
Well, first of all, I think that the characterization, that passage you just read, was generally true, but there was actually changes throughout the period of Soviet occupation, and they tried different strategies, and I don't think it's accurate to say that it was just entirely at every moment the same degree of failure. Because in fact, what the Soviets did was start off with a mission that had a very limited objective of regime change. Then they moved into a very expansive idea of Sovietizing Afghanistan. And they relied on very heavily on the kinetic or military operations. And then that was the period in the early and mid-1980s that the writer was describing, with indiscriminate bombings of civilian targets. And all they managed to do by using that kind of military force was to alienate the population and to serve to recruit new insurgents, even though they were winning all their battles on the battlefield. But what happened in the mid-1980s was that the Soviets adjusted their strategy, and there are some interesting parallels to the adjustments in the Soviet strategy at that time and what's going on now today in Afghanistan. They pulled back into the cities, they focused on protecting the cities, they gave up their idea of Sovietizing the Afghan population, the Afghan society, and they started to strike deals with local leaders and give more local autonomy. And that latter period of the Soviet occupation actually wasn't as unsuccessful as many people say. Ultimately, the Soviet Union fell, the Soviet Union withdrew. But there are some, although the comparison can't be taken too directly, there are some interesting parallels and perhaps lessons in what the Soviets went through.
Follow up, if you would, Mercedes. Then versus now, what's instructive about then that we can apply to now?
Well, I think you always want to learn from other people's mistakes whenever you can, but I also think that when people say, well, this is just the Soviets' experience in Afghanistan, part two, it's far too simplistic. When the Soviets were there, as Roland said, the degree of civilian casualties that were not only accidentally inflicted, but very deliberately inflicted, is a policy that NATO never pursued. We did not go through villages with helicopter gunships gunning down civilians because they were not being compliant. We do not face a generalized insurgency where members of the population want us out of Afghanistan. If you talk to Afghans in general, they don't say, we believe you're here to dominate us and we want you out. If they did, we'd be losing a lot faster than we are now, and you'd know quite quickly, because when Afghans want you out, it becomes very apparent. So I think that it's important to learn from that. And what Roland said about the lack of civil-military relations, which hopefully we're learning from now, and developing those strategies. Yes, we have pulled back into the populated centers. For example, we're focusing now a great deal between Kandahar city and about the center of Helmand. There's about 2 million people living in that area. But protecting the population doesn't just mean living in the cities, it also means defending that approaches. And why is that important? Because what we were talking about earlier with governance. Part of the Taliban's success has been the ability to set up shadow governments. And if you can't move into the areas and provide the population not only with the security they need, but the security to then develop actual Afghan-centric forms of governance, not Western, not Soviet, not any external imposition, then you're going to fail. Exactly.